Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Let's talk money.
Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. I'm Glenn Craig of Free From Broke, and I am your moderator tonight. Here are the minds that make up the Money Mastermind Show. We have Miranda Marquit of Planting Money Seeds, Peter Anderson of Bible Money Matters, Kyle Prevost of youngandthrifty.ca, and Tom Drake of Canadian Finance Blog. We have a special guest tonight, Luke Landis. I always mess up names. I apologize. Of Consumerism Commentary. Welcome to our show, Luke.
Thanks for having me here tonight.
Thanks for coming. And today's topic is where you should start when getting your finances in order. So before we go into that, I want to say that for those that are watching live, there is a Q&A app on our Hangouts page, the event page. If you have questions regarding getting your finances in order, please ask, and we will try to get to them, especially if they're pertinent to what we're talking about here. We love to hear from people out there. So back in the day, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was in credit card debt, trying to figure out what to do. I knew I needed to do something better with my finances. There's so many different aspects to personal finance that I felt myself at times in a state of analysis paralysis. I didn't know where to start. And I know I'm not the only person that's experienced this. So for the benefit of people out there, let's talk about where we're going to start if you want to get your finances in order. And maybe we can start pretty much at the beginning and talk about what it means to actually have your finances in order. Luke, you're a guest today. What do you think about that? What does it mean to you actually having your finances in order?
Well, there's a lot that goes into it, and you can look at it in stages if you want. And it's funny because my story is a little somewhat similar about how I got to the point where I realized I needed to do something about my own finances. I hit a rock bottom for me, over the course of 1 month back about 15 years ago. I lost my job, I lost my apartment, I lost my girlfriend, and I lost my car. And this was all in the span of like a month, and that was when I realized, I was heading into trouble. And the reason for me that this was happening was because I just found it easier for me to ignore my situation and actually deal with some of these grown-up issues. So the first thing that that I realized that I needed to do, and I think that this is true for a lot of people as well, is there just comes a point where you have to stop ignoring everything that's going around you, accept the fact that you have to make some changes in your life, and whether you're deep into debt and it's uncontrollable, or whether you just you see something else for yourself, you see that your life wants to, you want something else for your life, whatever the impetus is, and sometimes it has to be a pretty strong impetus, just getting to that point where you realize, listen, I need to stop messing around, I need to stop ignoring all of these bad things that are happening and actually start taking control. And that's really the first step, is coming to this realization. And I think there's a lot of psychologists will argue over this point as to whether the attitude changes first or whether the behavior changes first. And I'm on the fence about it. And for me, it was definitely an attitudinal shift before I could actually figure out how to do the behaviors. Some people, if they're led into behaviors, they actually get started. And the behaviors that I'm talking about are just, learning how to make better financial decisions day to day. So that really is the baseline. It has to come from one of those places.
It's interesting because, like I said, I think a lot of people had a similar story that I had, and I think what you're saying is a lot of people have that extension too. Why do we have to be at that base situation in order to finally make that change? But I think a lot of us get to that point. And hopefully if there's people out there that are feeling something along those lines, maybe you could pick up something here and start working on your finances before you get to that point where things are pretty bad. So
I like the part you talk about where you stop ignoring your finances, because for a lot of people, I think that's really where the problem comes in, is that they don't even worry about it. They know they have a paycheck coming in. They know they have a certain amount of money that's going to be in the account, and they try to spend more or less that amount of money every month. And they basically ignore the finances as much as they can. So I think really one of that first steps that you need to take in getting your finances in order is stopping what you're doing, taking stock of your current situation, where you are. Maybe you're in debt, maybe you're not in debt, but you're not getting ahead. Who knows? Whatever the situation is for you. But I think that first step in getting things in order is really just stopping, taking stock of your situation, and figuring out where you are. So.
Well, you got to look on the bright side too. I mean, you can lose your bank account, you can lose your car, but you gain the material for a good country music song. So that's a good place to start. I recently read Think Like a Freak, and I listened to those guys' podcasts. I know, Glenn, you do too. And they talk about how the 3 hardest words in the English language are I don't know. And they talk about how human beings are just hardwired not to say that. We believe people think less of us if we say I don't know. And I think that's a good starting point to just admit, look, I actually don't know about money. I don't know why that is. I wasn't taught. I never took an interest in it, but I don't know. And so now where do I start from there?
So where do we start? What's for the basic person, the average person, where do you start looking? How do you start getting everything together? What tool maybe do we start to use? Where should a person look first? Any ideas?
Well, say for my situation, what we've done is when we first started looking at our finances, we just sat down and we started tracking what income was coming in, what our monthly expenses or recurring expenses were, what we were trying to save and what we were trying to give. Basically, just get a complete picture of our finances. So to do that, we used You Need a Budget budgeting software at our house, and we just tracked all of our expenses every month that were going out, all the bills, our mortgage, everything. And after about 2 months, we just kind of sat down and looked at what we were spending. And that can be a really eye-opening experience when you start tracking expenses like that. You're going to see, like, oh my gosh, we spent $1,000 on eating out this month. I mean, that's crazy. So that's the situation we found at our house when we started tracking our finances. We found we were just way overspending on eating out and entertainment costs, and it was literally $1,200 or $1,300 a month that was just flying out the door for those types of things. So find a software or something that you're comfortable with to start tracking your finances and just get a better overall picture of where you are. And once you get that done, you're in a better place to know just how bad things are if you're really deep in debt, and if you need professional help, you need credit counseling or something along those lines, or if maybe you just need to put together a plan and a budget for your own family. So.
Yeah, I'll say that even You Need a Budget's a great piece of software, of course, but at the most basic level, what I found works for a lot of people at the very beginning, especially if they haven't ever thought about their finances before, is just taking pencil and a sheet of paper and taking just the inventory. Start with the inventory. And all that is what you have, your bank account balances, your credit card account balances on the day that you're doing this, your loans that are outstanding. You just need a snapshot to start of where you are. And then from there, that's going to give you such a good picture right there on paper in front of you that from there you can go to the software and you can start looking at how much you're spending over time and get a moving picture instead of just a static picture. I really like to start with the static first and then go to the moving. The moving will help you figure out exactly, how bad you're doing or how fast you're improving. But the pencil and paper thing is just so eye-opening that I wouldn't want people to skip that part.
And from there, it's I did something similar to what Luke said, and I never had a moment of terrible debt or anything, but I did start getting interested in finances, and when I put all that together, I found it really motivating to reduce the debt and start saving and actually see those numbers go in a better direction than they were previously.
Yeah, you want to talk about motivation. And I mean, one of the biggest things for me was when I started putting my finances online and actually seeing visually my progress month after month and seeing the charts go up and seeing the numbers go up. That was pretty self-motivating for me because you just want those numbers to go higher and higher even before you figure it out exactly why you want to have, why you want your wealth to grow. Eventually you have to figure out what your purpose in life is. But in the meantime, while you're trying to figure that out, we're all trying to figure that out, but while you're trying to figure that out, seeing those numbers go up is just so motivating.
Yep.
It's
I
interesting
think it's important, sorry, Glenn, to put it into bite-sized chunks. Yeah, like you can go onto each of our websites, and we've all got hundreds of articles, and personal finance can be extremely nuanced and intimidating. I'm not going to sit here and say it can't be, but what we'll all, I think, readily admit is that a huge majority of it is actually really straightforward. And if you break it into like executable little chunks, and use the concept of just-in-time learning, where you learn something and then put it into action, instead of trying to learn it all at once by reading, I think that will really help the average person just trying to make bite-sized, like you were talking about, Luke, starting at square one, pen and paper, or looking up YNAB, start there, move to the next thing. Don't start reading about leveraged investments and gold versus real estate and all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, when I was starting out, at the same time that I knew I needed to get rid of my credit card debt, I also had the voice in my head saying, I got to max out my 401k, I need a Roth IRA, I've got to invest for my future, I've got to have goals, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. So that's what kind of made it difficult. But I think to what Luke was saying, as complex as personal finance can be and how many nuances you can get, it's really it is a simple equation. And once you see how much you're actually bringing in, and then what you're spending on and how much is going out, and if you see a misbalance there, that is eye-opening. And when you can see the items that you're spending on, now you know what you can attack as far as what you need to do there. So that is pretty powerful. I also like what you said there, Luke, about accountability. You had income on your site for quite a while. For other people out there that might not have a blog, what can we do to be accountable? Is it wise to get together with a bunch of other people and maybe just start a personal finance club, maybe, or how can we do that to help improve the habit of taking care of our finances?
I think it definitely helps to have a partner. It doesn't have to be a spouse because certainly not everybody is married. But just having someone who is on your team and that you can talk about these issues with. People don't like talking about money, at least traditionally, and I think over the last few years, and maybe I'm just saying this because I'm deep in the middle of it, it seems that money is less of a taboo subject these days, which is good because we do need to talk about it. We need to learn from each other and we need to help each other out. If you have the benefit of a blog where you post your updates every month and you have people who are checking in and kind of following your journey with you, that's great, but not everybody's going to have that. But everyone does have someone that they can talk to somewhere, hopefully. If not, then, it really helps to find someone to continue, you can bounce ideas off each other and really get motivated from each other.
Yeah, I think it is important once you've kind of sat down and figured out what your situation is. If you are married, it's a good idea to get with your spouse and have kind of a family budget meeting just to talk about your finances, where you are, and help keep each other accountable. I know that's what we did at our household. We at the time we were doing Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University and using that program to help pay off some of our debt. And he suggests getting together with your family and doing a weekly or a monthly budget meeting. And I think that really did help us to stay accountable with each other and to stay accountable to our goals. And I think that's actually also another important part of the puzzle here is to set goals for where you want to be, immediate goals, things you want to get done in the immediate future, and then short-term goals, things you want to be getting done in the next 1 to 3 years. And if you're trying to fix your finances, those are really going to be some of the most important goals that you can set, I think.
Yeah.
And I think,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, a lot of us have been talking that we had some situation that brought us to a realization. We hit rock bottom, but that doesn't have to be the case for everybody that might be out there. So for sure, your finances don't have to be broken per se. It's a good idea for everyone to take some stock of what their finances are at, what the situation is, and then work from there. So it looks like we're starting with looking at basically what's the big picture here? Where are your finances? What are you spending on? Are there tools out there that can help you? We talked about why NAB, you need a budget. What else can we do to start getting on top of our finances? I know one problem I always had was I would pay credit card bills like a few days late, and I would get battered with late fees. What tools can we look to, or techniques to stay on top of our bills and our expenses to make sure that we're actually keeping track of it all and paying it all?
Well, one of the things, I'll just jump in, but one of the things that I think helps a lot is when you have a calendar. So if you don't know when your bills are due, or if you're having trouble paying your bills, like setting a reminder really helps. If you're not automating, I mean, my solution, of course, is to automate, and so everything just comes out automatically and I don't have to think about it, and we've talked about automating in the past. But if you don't automate, then I think it helps to set up a reminder. There are all sorts of apps from, just your basic Google Calendar or your reminder on your phone to organization and task management apps that can really help you figure out, when things are due, and make sure you set them, don't have the reminder set for your due date. Have the reminder set for like 7 to 10 days before your due date so that you can get it all squared away well ahead of time.
Yeah, I always trick myself when I get a bill that comes in. If it's due on the 15th, I'll write down that it's due on like the 9th. Mm-hmm. Because I know I'm just not. Sometimes things happen and you can't pay it on the 15th. Some people are smart and they just pay everything off when they get it. That's maybe the best way to do it. But I like to wait and hold it off and keep the money in my account. But I'll pad it with those extra days to make sure that I have time to get it there in time. And that's easy nowadays with online pay too. I used to, before all of that was standard, I would always get killed just mailing things out, and it just wouldn't get where it needed to go in time, and I was mailing it out like the last day too, so that didn't help. Where do financial goals fit into organizing our finances? At what point do we start thinking about, what our goals need to be? I know, Peter, you talked about goals a little bit and how important they are. Should we have goals going into it before we've organized everything? Or is that something like, let's organize everything and then look at where our goals are?
Yeah, I think you always know what your financial goals are going to be until you have a good idea of what's even possible in your universe. And one thing that I like to think about is that your financial goals are an offshoot of your life goals. So you can't really know what you need financially until you have a little bit of an idea of the life that you want to have. A lot of people, you ask them what their goal is, and they might say, well, I want to retire with $1 million. That's great. It's good to have a goal like that, but why? If you could still ask the question why, then you haven't really figured out exactly, the purpose of building wealth in the first place. So your financial goals will come out and should be relatively clear once you figure out how you want to live your life, what you want to do, and what values are important to you. I think it's very difficult to come up with meaningful financial goals without some kind of value-driven baseline for what you want to do.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, goals are only as good as its foundation, right? Like you said, if you want to retire with $1 million, it's great to say that, but if you're knee deep in credit card debt, how is that going to happen? I think that's a big part of the organization too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I really think that the goals part, there's different parts of the goals. I mean, once you get your finances, you've started tracking your finances and you've figured out where you are. I think the immediate and short-term goals, those can really be something that you plan for before you even get into the budget and all that stuff. Just figuring out, what am I going to be doing in the immediate goals? I'm going to be trying to cut my monthly bills. I'm going to try to compare cell phone plans, look for updated insurance, those types of things. Maybe I want to pay off any small debts that I have that I can just get rid of immediately. Looking at short-term goals, maybe I want to get out of debt in the next 3 years, so maybe I want to save up an emergency fund. All those things are things that you can start planning for at the beginning of the process. Maybe the long-term goals, you can start thinking about them, but maybe they're not as insistent of something that you need to look at right away. But again, those other immediate and short-term goals, I think they really can be at the beginning of the process.
I really liked the point that was kind of made about how you need to know where you are right now. Luke kind of mentioned, you need to know what's realistic for you. And I really like that idea of, being brutally honest with yourself and sitting down and saying, where am I and how realistic is this goal for me right now and what do I need to do to get back on track? And then I also really like the why of it. Why are you saving $1 million? Why do you want to get out of debt? You really need to find that motivation in your life and figure out if that's what you want or if you're doing it just because you're supposed to do it or because that's how things are done. What really works for you. And I think that that's, a big part of setting goals and starting your finances.
So Peter had me thinking when you mentioned emergency funds. So things like emergency fund, debt, investing, how do we organize that in our general finances? I think maybe the first thing is, like we've mentioned, you know what your snapshot is, know what's out there. But what then? What do we take care of afterwards when we start organizing our personal finances?
Well, I know this much, Glenn, is that I know a lot of people. They can discuss the benefits of dividend investing versus index investing. They can talk about different cycles and Forex, but they have no assets to their name because they don't know how to handle basic cash flow, what the whole panel's talked about already here. So I think if you're going to try and create a priority list like that, investing is an end product of the rest of the personal finance process, in my mind. It's a great goal to have. I certainly like reading about it because I'm a geek, but that shouldn't be your primary focus, in my opinion. I find it's too easy for people to get bogged down.
I think debt's got to be the priority. There's no more guaranteed kind of win than not paying all that interest on all the debt you're holding.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to when you're setting up a budget for your family. You're getting rid of, you're tracking your income, you're tracking your expenses, and you're cutting where you can, cutting all those unnecessary expenses out. And the byproduct of all that is you're going to have some extra cushion left over in your budget every month, which then allows you to start saving and investing and all that other stuff. So, like Tom said, I think getting rid of that debt really is, if you have debt, that's one of those things you really need to think about crushing that first and then moving on from there.
Yeah, I like taking a multi-pronged approach at the beginning, especially if there's debt and no savings. If at all possible, try to at least start building up an emergency fund while you're paying off debt. Otherwise, one emergency hits you and you're right back to where you started. And that is not a good position to be.
So really,
how much do you think people should save? Sorry.
I was just going to say you should be doing both. I was going to ask the same question.
Okay.
So for anybody that didn't hear, sorry, how much if you need an emergency fund, what should you have in it? How much should you put into it? What are your thoughts, guys?
Well, the one rule of thumb that I liked was something that I heard during the recession was that you should keep 1 month of at least 1 month of expenses for every percentage of unemployment rate there is. So if the unemployment rate is 8%, have 8 months worth of expenses in your emergency fund. I think that's a nice rule of thumb to get people started, and from there you can really you can tweak it from there, but at least that'll give you a starting point.
Yeah, but I really think too that you need to make sure that you remember that you're kind of doing a little at a time when you start looking at it in terms of like 8 months of expenses. If you spend $2,000 a month, that's $16,000, and that can be a rather daunting number. So I think that it's a good idea to kind of break it down as well. Have that be your ultimate goal, not something that you have to have overnight.
Right. Yeah. What is it? Dave Ramsey suggests you have $1,000 before you really start cracking down on the debt, because that should be enough to cover most small emergencies. But we weren't comfortable with that amount when we were getting rid of debt. We went up to $2,000, and that actually was enough. We had a couple of instances where we had $1,500 or $1,800 bills pop up for medical expenses or so forth, but the $2,000 was enough for us while we were paying off debt. So definitely something to think about for your family, and thinking about your level of expenses and the level of risk you want to take on.
Yeah, I know that this particular issue irked me when I was starting to get my finances in order, because when you are at zero and you have the debt, you want to get rid of the debt, but you want to build the emergency fund because everybody says that's so important at the same time, and it really just kind of draws you on both sides, and it's really hard to pick and choose. But I think having something there in savings, but really trying to attack that consumer debt that has high interest rates and getting that out of the way, it has a really big payoff for you. And once that's gone, you could really do other things with your money. But even before that, it's the steps before also where we're looking at our expenses and seeing what we really need and cutting back, because you don't want to fill in one hole that you're digging somewhere else also. And I think this discussion leads us to a question that we have here from Athena Lent, and she is asking, what should you focus on first as a young professional? Paying off student loans or retirement, or both, or one more than the other? So it's a similar sort of problem that I was having, but here now you have, maybe you have tons of student loans, but at the same time you want to think towards the future. So how do you know where to choose to put your money?
So I get this question a lot on Young and Thrifty, and it is sort of a hard question to answer depending on who you're talking to. Do they understand sort of how tax rates work? Do they understand what tax deductible debt is versus non-tax deductible in terms of interest and stuff? For most people, I think it's easier to just say, look, if your interest rate is like over 3 or 4%, just pay down the debt, because that's a 4% after-tax return. If you sort of do have a little bit more background in understanding finance, you might be able to look at, okay, if I put money in a tax advantage savings account, et cetera, I could get a better return on it. But I think for most people, especially with the student debt rates right now that I'm pretty familiar with, you got to start cutting that down to a manageable level.
Yeah, not only that, but in the U.S., student loans are, I think, the most difficult loans to actually get rid of in terms of, they don't disappear in bankruptcy. They stick with you for a long time. However, there are government programs that will forgive student loans if you work in certain fields for a certain amount of time, and there are other benefits out there as well. So there are a lot of things that you have to kind of take into account when you want to decide, what's best for you in terms of, do I tack these full force, put all of my extra cash flow into paying off the student loan, or should I, look into paying off the student loan at the same time, building an emergency fund, building, everything else that you need to survive financially?
Yeah, I really think it comes down to interest rate and what you can do with the money. I am fortunate. I consolidated all of my student loans back in 2005. So then I had a special program where after making a certain number of payments, it dropped down. My student loan interest rate is actually below 2%. And of course it's tax deductible. So I have tax deductible student loan interest that's below 2%, and I don't even bother to pay that off early. I'm just, going to let it ride because it's automatic, and that money could be doing a lot of other things. So that's, and really, it goes back to your situation, I guess. I mean, in my situation, and for me personally, and the level of risk I'm willing to take on, I'm willing to just let the student loans ride because they're so inexpensive for me. And I know that right now that's not the case for a lot of students.
Yeah, I did a lot of the same thing. My interest rates on my student loans back in the day were less than 2% as well. And so I was doing a little bit of both. I was paying off my student loans and I was doing retirement as much as I could. I was doing things on the side to make extra money as well. And every once in a while, when I got a windfall of cash for some reason, maybe I got a tax refund or something like that, I would throw that towards the student loan to try to pay it off faster. And I did end up paying that off pretty fast. So
yeah, I'm terrible. That sounds like sacrifice to me, and no. We know my stance there.
You want it all you want now.
That's right.
For me, my student loan was my first form of credit, so I actually let mine go a little longer than I needed to because I wanted the extra credit history when I was going for my first mortgage. So I was so close to having it paid off, I actually had to call them and ask if they could reduce my payment just so that it could last long enough until I got my mortgage.
Interesting.
I think a lot of people, it's also what they're comfortable with. A lot of people are very afraid of debt and leery of it. So psychologically, it would help them more to eliminate any debt than to put the money somewhere else, like investing. But for a lot of other people, we could throw in the concept of opportunity cost. And in a nutshell, that's, what else can I do that might be better? So if you're looking to put your money somewhere, if it's retirement or student loans, you can look at it and say, well, if I do this, what else could I have done with it, and is that better? So if you have very low student loans, like under 2%, which, it's like inflation basically, the rate, you might be able to do better long-term investing. But if you have higher student loans, and some people have these private loans that really do have high rates, that might be a better spot for you to attack. So let's go maybe into investing now. So you've maybe taken care of things, you know where your expenses are. Where does investing come into play in your overall financial picture? When do you start?
As soon as possible.
Now, yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday, exactly. I mean, ideally, for most people, it's going to be once they've really paid off those debts that they have. If you have debts that are high interest debt, ideally you're going to want to probably get those paid off first, especially those credit cards and other things like that. So at our house, that's what we did. We paid off all of our major debts, our credit card debt and so forth, and then we dove in headfirst investing in my company 401k to get a match, and then in a Roth IRA. So,
what do you guys consider high interest debt? I'm always interested because we say this term as personal finance people, high interest debt. Like for me, anything over 5% in that ballpark is starting to become high interest debt, just because that takes a reasonable amount of risk in order to achieve that after taxes, whether it's in the stock market or whatever the case may be. What do you guys feel about this? Is it just credit cards, or what would you classify?
Go ahead.
I'll jump in here.
So
I think I like your number there, Kyle. I think about 5-6%. I think you have to maybe look at what the market is returning. And I mean, the market, just in general, what is the Dow or the S&P 500 giving you? And 5 and 6% is probably reasonable that we should expect. It certainly does better, but you don't know that that's going to happen. So you have your credit cards, which usually, if you have a great rate, it might be 9%, and that's so you're already above that. And, car loans, there are people with mortgages that are above that. some mortgage rates, if you've locked in a good mortgage rate, you can be below that, and then you can take advantage of that. But high mortgage rates, other outside personal loans that you might have out there.
I think when paying down debt, I always found it's not even what is high interest debt, but what is your highest interest debt. Like I always pay down the biggest one, and whether it's above or below 5, it didn't matter as much. It was more about just getting rid of the stuff that was the highest and working the way down from there.
And I also like to take into account, the tax side of it as well. Your mortgage has a tax advantage to it. That's a terrible thing to say is, oh, hey, you're being rewarded for having debt. But I take that into account too and say, well, if I've got a mortgage rate that's 5%, but it comes with a tax deduction, I'm going to be more interested in investing some of my money in maybe a tax deferred account than really tackling that.
Just a quick note for Canadian listeners: mortgage interest is not tax deductible in Canada. Just so
sorry,
you know.
My bad.
No problem. I just wanted to clarify.
There's all sorts of hoops you can go through to try to make it tax deductible, but it's not truly the mortgage.
That's
some fancy something, yeah.
The Smith maneuver, but it's a really complicated form
deal.
of leverage investing. It doesn't really make your mortgage tax deductible.
And I have a point to get to that sort of a little later on. But to go back to investing, we've mentioned it in other shows, but if you have a company match 401k where they're going to match, let's say, up to 6%, you're getting some free money there. So you're already getting a quick return, plus there's tax benefits there too. So that's I think a good place to start investing if you're really kind of leery and not sure where to go. And it's pretty easy, and usually the funds that you put it into, they're pretty broad funds as well, so you don't have to worry about an individual stock to put it into.
Yeah, it may be a long time since any of us were first entering the workforce, but a lot of times now they will automatically, larger companies will automatically enroll you in the 401k. It's just a question of making sure that you're taking full advantage of all of the benefits your employer has to offer, especially on the investing side.
Yes, they might only put you in at maybe 2 or 3%, but you might get a 6% company match. So you do have to see what it is that they're going to give you and work with that. I want to go back to we have another question here from Shelly F. And she's asking, I am a single mother with student loans. I get frustrated with saving and my funds are tight at times. Where do I start and how? Savings just don't seem to add up. Advice, please. This is a little bit more of a, what do I do with my finances question, more so than just organizing your finances, but I think it does play into the questions as to what you attack and when.
Luke, our guest.
Well, I'll tell you, frustration is something that a lot of people feel, especially when it comes to their finances, when they're trying to figure out, they hear all this great advice everywhere, but they look at their numbers and they say, how does this apply to me? There is no way I can do this. And I really feel for people in that position because that's where I was. And, you've got people everywhere telling you, oh, just do a little bit here and, save $5, from your paycheck and it feels so impossible. It just feels that way. And it's really hard to get past that. And it's really hard for us to expect people to just listen to someone who's saying, oh, you just do a little bit at a time and you'll see that it's okay. It really helps to have someone, when you're in this position, when you're a single mom, a single dad, or if you're not, or if you don't have kids and you're still struggling. Your situation could be anything. But when you feel that there's absolutely nothing you can do, it really helps to find someone who maybe was in that position that you're in right now, or find someone who can empathize with you a little bit. There is a massive lack of empathy in the whole personal finance world, and you see that in the books that you read. You see that in blogs. You see it everywhere. No one feels for you. And that's a real big problem, because if people had a little more empathy, they would easier understand. It would be easier for them to understand how difficult it is for people to take some of these first steps that get them moving in the right direction. So I think, when you're in that position, you need to see someone who is close to you, someone who has lived a very similar life, who has gotten through some of these things that you're getting through. And it's hard to do that if your world is small. Now, the good thing about that is that the world isn't small anymore. We have the internet, and people who are in the same situation as you are everywhere, and they're all out there, and they're all helping each other. You just have to find the right places. I think there are a lot of financial forums that you can go on and you can read, not just advice from people like us who are experts and we've been through the whole thing and we're telling people how to do things, but people who are in the situation you are in now, or people who are they're close to the situation, but maybe they made a few steps forward. And that way you're able to relate to people a little bit better. And you can find that just by searching on Google and finding financial forums and finding support groups. It's all out there, and it's all necessary, because that's the only place that you're going to get the empathy that you need in order for you to get the support that will get you through a really, really difficult situation where you feel like there's no move that you can make that will work.
Yeah, I think you make a great point too about getting with people that can feel your pain, can help, have been through it before, and can have some empathy for you. I know at our church we've got a group of single mothers who help each other out with these types of things, and they bring in speakers to their group to talk every once in a while. I know they have had a financial advisor come in to speak with them and help them to set up a financial plan for their household, because it can be overwhelming to get started with something like that, especially when you've got kids running around the house and you're the only primary caregiver for them. You can also get with a group like the National Foundation for Credit Counseling if you're dealing with a lot of debt, and they can help hook you up with some company, a credit counseling company or something that will help you to set up a plan for paying off these debts and so forth. So it can be frustrating and hard when you're dealing with so little margin like that, but I think in that type of situation it's even more important to be taking stock of where you are and where you want to be going, and counting every dime, really.
And I think it's worth noting, she doesn't say whether she's in the income-based repayment, but it is worth noting that for student loans, for federal student loans, there's income-based repayment. And so for at least the federal portion of the debt, it's possible to get a payment plan that's based on your current income. Now, it does lengthen out the term of your loan, so in the long run, keeping up with that may not be the best solution. But for the short run, to kind of get your feet back under you and to get started, I think income-based repayment is a great place to start with student loans. Just for that reason, just because it gives you a little bit of breathing room. And then I think too, back to what Peter was talking about, community resources. I know people who, it's never fun, but I know people who, they turn to the local food pantry, or look for those community resources that are designed to kind of help you get your feet under you and put, that frees up a little bit of more money to put towards your savings and kind of get started.
So on a similar question here, when is the right time, and what situations do you bring in a professional, and what kinds of professionals should people look to try to find for their personal finances in different aspects? Like, I think unless your taxes are super simple, I know a lot of people can do their taxes on their own. It's not a bad idea to look for a good CPA and see what they have to say, because they are professionals. They do this all the time. They do hundreds, thousands of returns, and they know the tax laws probably better than we do for the most part. And I know a lot of software out there does give you everything, but it can still be daunting looking through all these different rules. So sitting with a CPA that can handle the questions, like what effect do my student loans have on my overall finances, and different things of that sort. And it could be a valuable thing to at least check out once if you don't want to use a CPA all the time.
I'm skeptical. I'm kind of controversial on my stance on this. I think that professional help, especially for lower income, like people who don't have a large amount of investable assets or a large amount of positive cash flow, it's way overrated. Do the basic reading yourself. Take it little chunks at a time. Most personal finance people out there, or financial planning people out there, still work on a commission. Unfortunately, the sort of incentives are all skewed. They're not going to focus on the right things. Nobody cares about your money as much as you do at the end of the day. So the chartered accountant for a little piecework like that, where they give you a quote up front, certainly you can make your decisions based on that quote. But for a lot of this other stuff, you spend a couple Sunday afternoons, you're going to know it as good as most of the salesmen that you're going to be dealing with at a financial planning place anyway.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Kyle here. Everybody out there is trying to sell something, and whether what they're trying to sell is right for you, you might not always be in the best position to be able to judge that. You don't need to speak to a professional money manager or financial planner when it comes to your investments until you have quite, sizable assets to make that worthwhile. And when your options go beyond just investing in an index fund or something like that. So, there are different types of professionals for all different types of things, but when it comes to your money, managing it is certainly something that could be done within the household for just about everybody out there.
Although I do think that when you feel completely overwhelmed, I think that's probably the time to go look for a little help. When you have no idea where to start and you just feel lost, I think either you look for a professional to help you or do what Luke suggested and go online, find a forum, kind of get that help, because the moment you start feeling overwhelmed and like you really can't do it, that's when you need to look for some help, I think. At least that's my measuring stick for when I look for help. The moment I started having a hard time with my taxes, that's when I went and, asked for help. And the moment I started feeling overwhelmed, that's when I started asking for help.
And I think I wanted to mention another type of professional that people might want to seek out is you might want to speak to somebody that can do some sort of estate planning, perhaps a lawyer and such. If you have people who are dependent upon your income, somebody who can set up a will or a trust, certainly I think that's an important part of your organization down the road as well. And I think it's an important thing a lot of people don't want to think about, even less than general personal finance. And insurance too. I don't know whether you need to seek out certain insurance agents, but you certainly do need to look into different types of insurance like life insurance and such. So with that, I think we've gone over organizing our finances and where to start pretty well. And I'd like to start to wrap things up and go through our final word on getting your finances in order. So we'll go around the room and we could all just sum up what we're thinking about here. So let's start with Tom. What's your final word?
Going back to almost the beginning of the show, Kyle mentioned sort of dealing with things just a little bit at a time, not reading a big book, but I don't want to sound self-promotional, but if people read blogs, they can you read one little thing and you focus on that one task, and little wins like that will add up way more than trying to do this one big picture thing all at once.
And Peter, what's your final word?
All right. Well, along those same lines, I think it's really important to take a step by step. And for me, it really starts with taking stock of your current situation, figuring out where you are. Like Luke said, maybe just writing down all your income and expenses on a piece of paper and figuring out the basics. And then going from there and starting to track for a couple of months to see what your regular spending is. And from there, setting your goals for the immediate and short term are most important for me, but also try setting a few long-term goals. And then set up a family budget and then think about automating where you can in order to make things more automatic so you really don't have to think about it. So first step, just take stock of where you are and go from there.
And Kyle, your final word.
This isn't a new problem. I think it's important for those people who are frustrated to remember that this is a human thing. We've been dealing with it. You know, I'm a bit of a classic English buff in my spare time. Charles Dickens said, annual income £20, annual expenditure £19, 19 shillings and 6 pence. Result, happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20, 6, result, misery. Basically, if you spend a little more than you make, you're going to be miserable. If you make a little more than you spend, you're going to be okay.
And Miranda, your final word.
I think it's pretty well covered here. I think, you know, in the end, your starting point is what do you want your money to do for you? I'm a big fan of seeing my money as a means to an end rather than the end itself. So start out by saying what do you want your money to accomplish for you, and then kind of go from there to see where you're at. Are you actually spending your money where you want to spend it to, you know, meet your lifestyle goals or ultimate goals or whatever, and then start from there. Start paying attention to what you're doing with your money, and then build a plan around that.
And I'll close up here with mine. I think what Luke was saying is very important in that you're not alone out there. What you're going through, odds are a lot of people are going through it too, and you can overcome it. As far as the first step, know what you're spending on, and really start to look at that. That in itself is eye-opening, and if you can start to attack things that maybe you don't need to be spending on, then things start to open up from there. Luke, if you'll give us your final word.
Yeah, well, my final word comes from the idea that there is more that is within your control than you probably believe, and I know that that was true for me. You know, I believed that I was a victim of circumstances for a long time until I actually started, you know, focusing and making changes for myself. So just keep in mind that although you can't control everything, you can't control whether you're born in a third world country or not, but there is a lot that is within your control. And once you come to that, it'll be so much easier to make changes to your life and your finances.
Luke, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your expertise with our audience.
Anytime.
For those that are out there, can you enlighten them as to where they can find you?
You can find me right now on lukelandis.com or at Luke_Landis on Twitter. And that's probably the best way to reach me. Of course, I'm still writing at Consumerism Commentary, so you can find some of my financial writing there.
Thanks again, Luke. And thank you, everyone, for joining us at the Money Mastermind Show. We love to hear comments, so when our show notes are up at moneymastermindshow.com, please ask questions, leave comments. Also, if you aren't already following us on iTunes, you can subscribe to our podcast there and on Stitcher as well. Good night, everyone. Until next week, be good with your money.
Thanks for joining us on the Money Mastermind Show. Get more information at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Google+.